Welcome everyone to Northwest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter with Kyle Torgerson and our Health Talk contributor out of Northern California, Jody Summers. Glad to see you again, Jody.
Nice to see you.
Let's talk about this word that nobody wants to say, cholesterol. Well, in the shortened version of it, fat. It all ties together, doesn't it? So what do you want to share with about cholesterol? What do people want to know? This is, while you're thinking about that, the answer to that question, one of the things that's of real interest to me is, as you know, I'm a pretty avid researcher in a lot of these subjects, and I'm just amazed by how much misinformation there still is on the web, and how you just, in an hour's research, you can find tons and tons and tons of conflicting information. How's somebody supposed to sort this all out?
So that's kind of a loaded question that you didn't tell me you're going to ask, but
yeah.
So the misinformation is actually coming from what we consider, what many people consider reliable sources and mainstream medical. And you can go on any American Heart Association, American Diabetic Association, all of those, what we would consider organizations, whether they're medical organizations tied somehow with the government. They have all of the literally the older information, which was, we'll talk here today a little bit, it was very manipulated to show things that were not completely true. And so the reason there's such confusion, it's not that people are dumb, but it's that the information that we're given from the experts for many years is wrong. And so it's hard to, unless you're doing an hour's worth of research, to just read something and then you assume it's true because it's coming from what we would consider a reliable source, but in this case is not, because they have not caught up with the truth.
So what are concerns, like legitimate concerns, that are associated with high cholesterol?
Well, there are, so the concerns that people hear is that it's very much tied with heart disease. You have high cholesterol, you have a higher risk of heart disease. There's now, all of these years later, because there were some studies done in the 30s and the 40s called the Framingham study, and then Ansel Keys did a study and pulled out information that showed that saturated fat and cholesterol were directly tied to heart disease. But over the years, even as cholesterol levels have come down through the low-fat diet, the non-saturated fat diet, and statin drugs, our cholesterol levels are actually lower now as an overall population than they were in the 60s and the 70s when we were eating, more fat and didn't take statin drugs as a whole. And yet heart disease still remains the #1 cause of death. So if you look at what we're told is the risk, which is heart disease, but then you look at the real life actual success. In 2016, the University of South Florida did a study with 68,000 people over age 60. And there's literally no association between cholesterol and what's called early death. And there just is none. There's association between, I wish I had a little chart. Let me see if I can explain this. So we have the in our heart twist and turn different ways, and oftentimes we'll get plugged up with cholesterol. So that is a problem. There's no doubt about it that cholesterol plugs arteries, but it's more like, cholesterol is actually more like a Band-Aid when those arteries get inflamed due to high processed food diets and refined sugars and refined carbohydrates. The arteries get inflamed like the rest of our body. They cause inflammation and they cause a little bit of this scarring. Well, the cholesterol actually is like a Band-Aid that comes and repairs that. Well, then it starts to build up because it's kind of sticky. And that's when you get the blockage, which is dangerous and needs to be taken care of right away because people die. And that, it's the cholesterol is broken through. But the cholesterol is like the fixer. So sometimes I give this example. If you look at fire, so you're from a Martian from another planet, and you come down to this state of California, which is always on fire. and you look at the fires and you say, oh my gosh, it looks like the firefighters, they're at every single fire. The firefighters are the problem. Well, the firefighters are there to put the fire out, they didn't cause the fire. And it's like cholesterol. The cholesterol came in response to inflammation. Mm-hmm. Yes, the cholesterol is there and it's a problem and now it needs to be broken through. But if there was no inflammation and no area of like, what's the word, like abrasion almost from the inflammation, there wouldn't be the need for cholesterol to attach itself to those arteries.
Mm-hmm. There was a kind of an interesting analogy I heard one physician give, because it was kind of an unusual thing, you know, to come from the medical industry. But he said that, you know, as you consume these high sugar, high carb diets, these types of foods that are very bad for you and cause inflammation, and then this person associated with that has high levels of insulin response in their system. He goes, it's kind of like running a bottle brush down your veins and arteries. He goes, it causes these abrasions, cracks, breaks in the arteries throughout the whole system. Insulin is doing that. He goes, so he goes, it creates that problem in the system, and as you just explained, cholesterol comes along to fix it. And that's why and the reason why he was giving me this illustration, he said the consequence of taking cholesterol reducing drugs and not fixing the underlying problem is heart attack or stroke. So you get rid of the cholesterol, which is fixing the veins, but you end up having a vein burst or a stroke or heart attack related problem because the cholesterol is not there doing its job. It's just the illustration you gave is fantastic, because if there's a fire burning and you go, the problem are the firefighters, just get rid of them. Well, then the fire is completely out of control. And that's exactly what happens in the body as well when you take a drug to get rid of cholesterol. So that's a great illustration. I've not heard that before, but that is perfect.
And there's so many benefits. You asked the question about, you know, what are the drawbacks of cholesterol? And that is definitely one. But the benefits outweigh that drawback. Well, the drawback is, it's not really a drawback, because if you address the underlying issue of inflammation and insulin and crappy food, mm-hmm. you know, you're going to fix that problem. But I have listed here 7 things that are beneficial to our body. So if I can just read them if you would like me to do that, because I wrote them. I didn't want to forget any because it's so vital. So we get cholesterol in our body from 2 sources. One is our liver. This is how important it is. Our body is so smart that if we never ate one more bite of cholesterol food, you had a cholesterol-free diet from now until the day you died, mm-hmm. it is so important to have cholesterol in your body that your liver manufactures it itself. It's more important than vitamin C, any of the vitamins that are what we call essential. Essential means your body cannot make it or manufacture it. You have to eat it through food and or supplementation. Liver. Cholesterol is so important, more important than the essential things that you need to eat, that it makes it on its own. You don't even need to eat it because your body manufactures it. Mm-hmm. So your body will manufacture as much cholesterol as you need. And here's what it's needed for. The cell membranes that we have, is the vast majority of that structure is cholesterol. Mm-hmm. And people who have multiple sclerosis or any other metabolic disease that has to do with the cell membrane, there's a direct correlation between the importance of healthy cholesterol levels and those diseases.
What about things like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all of those? Because I know how vital fat is to keep the brain healthy. What about those?
So that was number 5, the healthy brain. Our brain is...
Okay, sorry, I'm jumping ahead on you.
All good. But I'll start there because you asked. I mean, I'll go there. So our brain has a lot of... If you took out the liquid, okay, so now it's just, you know, all of the water is removed. Mm-hmm. If you look at it, there's parts of it that are up to 80% cholesterol in different pockets. And if you strip the cholesterol from the brain, like through a low-fat diet or statin drugs, what you're doing is like stripping the fat out of the brain. Now, this is an illustration that is there, you know, if anybody's watching go, well, that didn't even sound very scientific. It's just an illustration, okay? but I'm going to make this anyway. So now it's like your brain. So you're cooking on the stove and you have your pan, it's a non-stick pan, and you're making, let's say you're making a white chicken breast. There's no fat in it. So a lean cut of chicken. Okay, a chicken breast. That's right. That's what they're called. So you turn the fire on, you've got the heat, and you're cooking the protein, but it's starting to stick. Well, what do you put in the pan to help protein from not sticking?
A little bit of fat.
So if you look at Alzheimer's in the brain, one of these symptoms are these protein tangles, these amyloid, these plaques and stuff, and they're sticky protein. Well, when we strip the brain from fat, we get sticky protein, just like if you're cooking and you've got protein. If you want to let it so it doesn't stick, you add in fat. We have these areas in our brain filled with fat and cholesterol for a reason. And to strip that out, as we've seen cholesterol levels, remember I said cholesterol levels are lower now than they were in the 60s and 70s because people are on statin drugs. And as those people have taken, the statin drug has increased over the last few decades, Alzheimer's and dementia has increased in exponential, the same exact, almost, if you look, it's almost the same. Now, I realize that as a population, we're also getting older and some of that is in there, but this epidemic of Alzheimer's didn't exist that many years ago. Alzheimer's wasn't even on the list. Now it's a sixth leading cause of death. And as we continue to bring down cholesterol levels, we're seeing more and more brain diseases.
When you mentioned about those complications and how they come about to playing a role for people, and they're more prevalent the older you get because those mistakes just compound. But a really exciting thing for me is that, when I think about how rapidly a young baby, as an example, creates cells, new healthy cells, and then how slowly that happens when somebody's older, I have been inclined to believe at various points in my life that while, all of these health tips and health ideas are good ideas, that, there is eventually a point in which it's too late. And I got to learn firsthand how I was completely off base with that there never is a point in which it's too late. I guess if you're on the deathbed and you're in comatose and they say you got, maybe that's too late. But anyway, there's a friend of my mother's back in the state of Minnesota. His name was Rudy. And Rudy had Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. He walked around with a little shuffle step and pretty much never left home. And I was having a conversation with my mother one day. This is like 3 years ago. I was having a conversation with my mother one day, and I made some kind of comment about this low-fat diet that I used to be on, and my mom had me on speakerphone. So there's Rudy and his wife sitting there, and his wife says, "Rudy, that's what you're doing. Kevin's a low-fat diet. That's what you're doing." And Rudy's like, "No, I'm not." And she goes, "Oh, baloney. You wake up in the morning and you have 6 or 7 chocolate chip cookies with skim milk. You're doing all of that because, and you're proud of yourself because you think none of it has fat in it. And then all day long you're eating foods which don't have any fat in it." And she goes, "Why don't you try Kevin's diet?" And here, Rudy has all these health complications, whatever else, and he's concerned that what I might suggest could have a negative impact on his health. And his wife just laughs and she goes, "Rudy, you can't be any worse than you are. Shut up." I was just cracking up listening to this couple fight at the table. And so I just threw a couple ideas out there and politely got off the phone. I was like, I don't want to be in this little, spat. And then, I'm not kidding, this was somewhere around 90 days later. This Rudy and his wife came over to visit my mom fairly frequently. And around 90 days later, my mom calls me and she says, "Rudy is coming over this afternoon. Can you call me like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon?" I was like, "Sure." So I call, and there's, I don't remember Rudy's wife, but anyway, they showed up, and they're sitting at the table, and Mom gets on, puts the phone on speakerphone. She says, "Rudy, tell Kevin how you're feeling," because his wife made him do this stuff. He didn't have any choice. She prepares all of his food and everything else. She forced this on him. And so Rudy gets on the phone. He's like, yeah, I said, well, how you doing? Are you feeling any better? He goes, oh, no, about the same, you know, whatever else. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, that kind of fits exactly what I thought. You know, I mean, it's guy's 84 years old, whatever. It's too late. Well, his wife goes, baloney, Rudy. You are now walking to town. You never did that before. You get up every single day. He goes, you're doing some exercises. She goes, even your speech is more coherent. She goes, don't tell me you're better. She goes, every way we know you and see you, you're better. She goes, by the way, Rudy, you also drove here today. You weren't driving 3 months ago. You drove me here today. He was just, so she just like blasted him for it. She goes, no, you're going to keep doing this. So I haven't, my mother passed away 2 years ago in December, as you know, and I have not had any contact with Rudy and his wife since. But that was actually kind of a learning lesson for me, that getting rid of all this sugary, carby diet, that it actually is not too late, even if you're 84 years old.
I couldn't agree. When you said it's too late, I'm thinking I would disagree with you, but I wasn't going to argue. It's not. Again, I mean, of course, there's a time and a place. You know, if you're, yes, that is too late. But if you're active and you can understand about the differences of foods, don't eat processed foods. They're not good for you. They're just not good for you in so many reasons that we've covered over the weeks. You know, the last.
All I would say then is my idea about, you know, it being too late. My idea on this has simply changed, recognizing that older people produce new healthy cells slower, is that the same strategies would just take more time. That's all.
Absolutely. And the sicker you are, the slower it is to get back to, you know, the more health issues. I've seen people come back from amazing dip. And generally there's a thing, and I think that's called the I forget the name. It starts with an H response, where the newest issue you have in your body generally gets better first. And then it goes back and back. So something that somebody's had for 15 years is like that was their first symptom, is generally the last to get better. And so you take those steps back. But you talk about babies. Well, breast milk is hugely rich in cholesterol, and it's because they need that for their brains. So any mommies that are listening out here who are not breastfeeding, I'm not, whatever, breastfeeding is best because that's specific to that child. But if you couldn't breastfeed, didn't work out, you adopted that baby, the next best fat for a baby's brain is cod liver oil. And you can get that at any health food store. Organic. I like the brand Nordic Naturals, but there's many different really good quality, clean cod liver oil, and a few drops in the baby's, if you're giving a formula, a few drops in the baby's bottle, but, you know, according to directions. I'm not, you know, but that is a very healthy fat if you're not nursing. And if you're nursing, that baby's getting everything it needs anyway. So
just a really short piece on this thing about a newborn baby. I had one physician that I interviewed years ago who made the comment to me. He says, like, when you were, because I was casting a little bit of doubt on his premise that more fats were better in the diet. And this is before I'd learned any of this stuff. And so I was challenging him on this. And I don't remember the exact statistics that he shared with me, but it was something along this lines. He says, when you were born, you were 90% fat, 8% protein, 2% minerals, and like 0.1% carbs. He goes, how did you think you were going to improve on that? and he goes, that was the healthiest day of your life. He goes, how did you think you're going to improve on that? I was like, well, I guess that maybe makes some sense, doesn't it? But not that those are the percentages that we should be following as far as our dietary intake, but he did put me in my place. So, you know, I'm one of these guys who loves to be wrong. You know, I'm interested in the truth. And there may be things that I'm doing right now today with regard to my health that I'm going to learn 6 months, maybe from these shows we're doing with you, Jody. I'm going to learn things that I was doing or things that I held to be true were untrue, and learn new things. And that's fantastic. There's something I want to touch on really quickly, because I know you're short on time. You mentioned Ansel Keys back in the beginning. And there was a gentleman by the name of Gary Tobes. He published a book. It was published back in 2004. It was a New York Times bestseller. The title of the book is, What If It's All a Big Fat Lie? And Gary Tobes was a NASA researcher, and his colleagues told him, because he was getting kind of bored of his professional role, and they said, if you want to get some bad science, go study the medical science and the science in the food and nutrition industry. So he did. And Ansel Keys is one of the people he came across, and he is highly critical of Ansel Keys. And he said, whoever throws out a huge percentage of their data to come up with a premise, he goes, I don't have to know anything about medicine or food to know this guy is full of BS. So your thoughts on Ansel Keys?
So the study, I don't know if you have the little chart there or not, but the studied more than 14 countries. There were combined, and he threw out the ones that didn't match his hypothesis. So the little chart, I don't know if you can see it or you pulled that up.
Yep, we got it. Kyle brought it up on the screen.
Perfect. So what he did find is that on the left there, where it says what he did say, is that, you know, saturated fat is associated with heart disease and death. But what he left out was the part about, he left out several things, actually, not just countries, which he left out more countries than he included. So he studied a bunch of countries and different groups of people, and he left out more than he included in his, you know, because it didn't match what he was looking for. The other thing he left out was the consumption of sugar that those same populations were eating. So it appears that the countries that had less sugar intake but higher fat intake, healthy fat, saturated fat, and different healthy fats, actually had the lowest heart rate deaths, but he didn't put that in. So what you're going to see is that, you know, it doesn't really match. And this study was the basis of what the American Heart Association and the American Medical Association and all of the other industries based the rest of their research on. Just like in law, you know how one case can actually set the standard and then everybody else kind of refers back to that. It's no different in medicine. So you have a study and then you use that as your basis for something else. Well, if the basis and the foundation of the study of healthy or fat in general is wrong, everything else coming out of there is going to be not accurate. And we've seen that over the years based on the study. I'm not a big fan of Ansel Keys. I'm just not. You know, when you purposefully manipulate a study to match what you want to market is, in my opinion, this is totally my opinion, I believe that this particular man did more damage to the population as a whole than any other person ever associated with the health or medical field.
So let me share something with you, Jody, that you maybe don't know. In the deeper dive, digging into all this, because I'm like curious, like, why did this start? Why did Ansel even do the study to begin with? Why was he involved in this stuff? He was at, you know, around the time of the Vietnam War as well. Like, even soldiers' rations were changing because of what Ansel Keys was doing. But behind the scenes, when I say behind the scenes, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I believe people do things for business reasons, and they do things that are either beneficial to them or beneficial to others, and you don't always know what the motivations are behind it. So this isn't conspiracy theory stuff at all. This is nothing but the simple, gosh, honest fact. One of the guys funding Ansel Keys was Rockefeller. One of the guys who was investing heavily in the West Indies or East Indies sugar business was Rockefeller. The sales of sugar out of the Indies market went through the roof after this study by Ansel Keys. Those are just the facts. People can say whatever they want to about it, but that's just the gosh honest truth.
Yep. And there is no disputing. And there's also no disputing the actual success. I'm sorry, but we are no healthier on the low-fat, heart-healthy diet than we were before. In fact, we're less healthy because it's wrong. And it's not intended how we, you know, what we didn't get to today, and I would like to do this maybe on another time because there is so much rich material in there.
Can we continue this conversation next week as well, Jody? Because there's so much good stuff here to share.
Exactly. I've got these 7 things. I would like to spend a little time on all of these different benefits of cholesterol and how they benefit our body. And because some people may have some of these issues, And just by changing a few things might have less symptoms. So I would, rather than to just highlight these things, I would love to go in depth next week.
Let's do that. Thanks, Jody. Thanks to everybody who joined us here on the broadcast. We are unfortunately out of time. We're up against a hard stop, so we do have to go, but we'll be back next Thursday to take a deeper dive into cholesterol and the benefits of it to human health. I'm Kevin Hunter with Kyle Torgerson. Thanks to Jody Summers joining us out of Northern California, and thanks to our viewers. Till next time, take care.